Master Wordlist. Words starting with letter V. Vacuous means empty, inane. For example, the vacuous remarks of the politician annoyed the audience, who had hoped to hear more than empty platitudes. Vagabond means wanderer, tramp. For example, in summer, college students wander the roads of Europe like carefree vagabonds. Vagrant means homeless wanderer. For example, because he was a stranger in town with no visible means of support, Martin feared he would be jailed as a vagrant. Valedictory means pertaining to farewell. For example, I found the valedictory address too long, leave-taking should be brief. Valid means logically convincing, acceptable. For example, you're going to have to come up with a better argument if you want to convince me that your reasoning is valid. Validate means confirm, ratify. For example, I will not publish my findings until I validate my results. Valor means bravery. For example, he received the Medal of Honor for his valor in battle. Vampire means ghostly being that sucks the blood of the living. For example, children were afraid to go to sleep because of the many legends of vampires roaming at night. Vanguard means forerunners, advance forces. For example, we are the vanguard of a tremendous army that is following us. Vantage means position giving an advantage. For example, they fired upon the enemy from behind trees, walls and any other point of vantage they could find. Vapid means dull and unimaginative. For example, boring, said Jessica, as she suffered through yet another vapid lecture about dead white male poets. Vaporize means turn into vapor. For example, zap, when Super Mario's atomic ray gun as he vaporized another deadly foe. Variegated means many-colored. For example, without her glasses, Gretchen saw the fields of tulips as a variegated blur. Veer means change in direction. For example, after what seemed an eternity, the wind veered to the east and the storm abated. Vehement means forceful, intensely emotional. For example, Alfred became so vehement in describing what was wrong with the Internal Revenue Service that he began jumping up and down and frothing at the mouth. Velocity means speed. For example, the train went by at considerable velocity. Venal means capable of being bribed. For example, the venal policeman cheerfully accepted the bribe offered him by the speeding motorist whom he had stopped. Vendetta means blood feud. For example, the rival mobs engaged in a bitter vendetta. Vendor means seller. For example, the fruit vendor sold her wares from a stall on the sidewalk. Veneer means thin layer, cover. For example, casual acquaintances were deceived by his veneer of sophistication and failed to recognize his fundamental shallowness. Venerable means deserving high respect. For example, we do not mean to be disrespectful when we refuse to follow the advice of our venerable leader. Venerate means revere. For example, in Tibet today, the common people still venerate their traditional spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. Venial means forgivable, trivial. For example, when Jean Valjean stole a loaf of bread to feed his starving sister, he committed a venial offense. Venom means poison, hatred. For example, bitten by a rattlesnake on his ankle, the cowboy contortionist curled up like a pretzel and sucked the venom out of the wound. Vent means a small opening, outlet. For example, the wine did not flow because the air vent in the barrel was clogged. Vent means express, utter. For example, the angry teacher vented his wrath on his class. Ventriloquist means someone who can make his or her voice seem to come from another person or thing. For example, this ventriloquist does an act in which she has a conversation with a wooden dummy. Venturesome means bold. For example, a group of venturesome women were the first to scale Mt. Annapurna. Veracity means truthfulness. For example, asserting his veracity, young George Washington proclaimed, "Father, I cannot tell a lie." Verbalize means put into words. For example, I know you don't like to talk about these things, but please try to verbalize your feelings. Verbatim means word for word. For example, he repeated the message verbatim. Verbiage means pompous array of words. For example, after we had waded through all the verbiage, we discovered that the writer had said very little. Verbose means wordy. For example, someone mute can't talk, someone verbose can hardly stop talking. Verdant means green, lush in vegetation. For example, Monet's paintings of the verdant meadows were symphonies in green. Verge means border, edge. For example, Madame Curie knew she was on the verge of discovering the secrets of radioactive elements. Verisimilitude means appearance of truth, likelihood. For example, critics praised her for the verisimilitude of her performance as Lady Macbeth. She was completely believable. Verity means quality of being true, lasting truth. For example, did you question the verity of Cato Kalin's testimony about what he heard the night Nicole Brown Simpson was slain? Vernacular means living language, natural style. For example, cut out those old-fashioned these and nows and write in the vernacular. Versatile means having many talents. For example, she was a versatile athlete, earning varsity letters in basketball, hockey, and track. Vertex means summit. For example, let us drop a perpendicular line from the vertex of the triangle to the base. Vertigo means severe dizziness. For example, when you test potential airplane pilots for susceptibility to spells of vertigo, be sure to hand out air sickness bag. Verve means enthusiasm, liveliness. For example, she approached her studies with such verve that it was impossible for her to do poorly. Vestige means trace, remains. For example, we discovered vestiges of early Indian life in the cave. Vex means annoy, distress. For example, please try not to vex your mother, she is doing the best she can. Viable means practical or workable. For example, that idea won't work. Let me see whether I can come up with a viable alternative. Vicarious means acting as a substitute. For example, many people get a vicarious thrill at the movies by imagining they are the characters on the screen. Vicissitude means change of fortune. For example, humbled by life's vicissitudes, the last emperor of China worked as a lowly gardener in the palace over which he had once ruled. Vie means contend, compete. For example, politicians vie with one another, competing for donations and votes. Vigilance means watchfulness. For example, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Vignette means picture, short literary sketch. For example, The New Yorker published her latest vignette. Vigor means active strength. For example, although he was over 70 years old, Jack had the vigor of a man in his prime. Vilify means slander. For example, waging a highly negative campaign, the candidate attempted to vilify his opponent's reputation. Vindicate means clear from blame, justify or support. For example, the lawyer's goal was to vindicate her client and prove him innocent on all charges. Vindictive means out for revenge, malicious. For example, I think it's unworthy of Martha to be so vindictive, she shouldn't stoop to such petty acts of revenge. Viper means poisonous snake. For example, the habitat of the horned viper, a particularly venomous snake, is in sandy regions like the Sahara or the Sinai Peninsula. Virile means manly. For example, I do not accept the premise that a man proves he's virile by being belligerent. Virtual means, in essence, for practical purposes. For example, she is a virtual financial wizard when it comes to money matters. Virtue means goodness, moral excellence. For example, virtue carried to extremes can turn into vice. Humility, for example, can degenerate into servility and spinelessness. Virtuoso means highly skilled artist. For example, the child prodigy Yehudi Menuhin grew into a virtuoso whose violin performances thrilled millions. Virulent means extremely poisonous, hostile. For example, laid up with a virulent case of measles, Vera blamed her doctors because her recovery took so long. Virus means disease communicator. For example, the doctors are looking for a specific medicine to control this virus. Visceral means felt in one's inner organs. For example, she disliked the visceral sensations she had whenever she rode the roller coaster. Viscid means adhesive, gluey. For example, the trunk of the maple tree was viscid with sap. Viscous means sticky, gluey. For example, melted tar is a viscous substance. Vice means tool for holding work in place. For example, before filing its edges, the locksmith took the blank key and fixed it firmly between the jaws of a vice. Visionary means produced by imagination, fanciful. For example, she was given to visionary schemes that never materialized. Vital means vibrant and lively, critical. For example, the vital, highly energetic first aid instructor stressed that it was vital in examining accident victims to note their vital signs. Vitriolic means corrosive, sarcastic. For example, such vitriolic criticism is uncalled for. Vituperative means abusive, scolding. For example, he became more vituperative as he realized that we were not going to grant him his wish. Vivacious means animated, lively. For example, she had always been vivacious and sparkling. Vociferous means clamorous, noisy. For example, the crowd grew vociferous in its anger and threatened to take the law into its own hands. Vogue means popular fashion. For example, jeans became the vogue on many college campuses. Volatile means changeable, explosive, evaporating rapidly. For example, the political climate today is extremely volatile. No one can predict what the electorate will do next. Volition means act of making a conscious choice. For example, she selected this dress of her own volition. Voluble means fluent, talkative. For example, the excessively voluble speaker suffers from logorrhea. He runs off at the mouth a lot. Voluminous means bulky, large. For example, a caftan is a voluminous garment, most people wearing one look as if they're draped in a small tent. Voluptuous means gratifying the senses. For example, the nobility during the Renaissance led voluptuous lives. Voracious means ravenous. For example, the wolf is a voracious animal, its hunger never satisfied. Vortex means whirlwind, center of turbulence. For example, sucked into the vortex of the tornado, Dorothy and Toto were carried from Kansas to Oz. Vouchsafe means grant, permit. For example, occasionally the rock star would drift out onto the balcony and vouchsafe the crowd below a glimpse of her celebrated features. Voyeur means peeping Tom. For example, Nancy called her brother a voyeur when she caught him aiming his binoculars at an upstairs window of the house of the newlyweds next door. Vulnerable means susceptible to wounds. For example, his opponents could not harm Achilles, who was vulnerable only in his heel. End of the word list with words starting with letter V.